All right, Brian, for the final segment of today's show, we are going to be breaking down Notre Dame's second opponent of the season, the Texas A&M Aggies. They are coming up to Notre Dame on September 16th. It's the first night game of the season for Notre Dame. Actually, it's the earliest night game that they've had on their schedule since Michigan in 2018. And so it's going to be a big-time game, probable top 25 matchup, if not a top 20 matchup in South Bend under the lights. This is a matchup that I'm really excited for. You and I were talking before the show, and I know a lot of the attention is going to go to the Notre Dame-Miami game. I get it. It's the first game of the season. It's in Miami. Last time they played wasn't that wasn't that high octane of a game for Notre Dame. Miami sure as heck showed up like it was a high octane game. Different story for a different show. But I think that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. But I think sometimes it can maybe overshadow the fact that this is a pretty good Texas A&M team coming to South Bend on September 16th. So we're going to begin by breaking down the series history, looking at that up top, and then we're going to start breaking down offense and defense. I'm excited to start breaking down the Texas A&M Aggies today, man.
Yeah, it's just a big one. Like, look, your first two games are your big games. We've talked about that. Everybody knows that. And they present very different challenges. And you're facing a Texas A&M team that we spent all summer last summer. That's all anybody wanted to talk about was Texas A&M, Texas A&M, Texas A&M, because it was the first game and it was a huge game. And Notre Dame got that win, and it was a big win. And I think, I think you nailed it, Trevor. I think some of the trepidation is, well, the last time we played down there against them, boy, it was a butt whooping. And last time you played Texas A&M at their place, you got to win. So there's this confidence. Well, of course they're going to beat Texas A&M at home. Like, that's what 2013 fans. That's what fans probably thought in 2013 when Oklahoma came back to Notre Dame. Well, I beat them in Oklahoma last year. It's probably going to beat them again this year. Nope, didn't beat them that year. So you're going to have to be on top of your game the first 2 weeks, the first two games of the season. And I think Texas A&M is probably the best team that Notre Dame is going to face this year. Talent-wise, roster-wise, I think it's the toughest game. May not be the toughest game, but it's one right now that I look at and say, I think this is the game that's really going to tell us the most about who this Notre Dame football team is. Because if you go on the road and you beat Miami, then that's great, and that's wonderful, and I'm really happy about that. But that could be kind of thrown right out the window the next week if the next game. It's a bye week in between. But if you come home that next game and all of a sudden you're down, you lose to Texas A&M at home. That takes a lot of that juice away, that excitement away, and that's something the Notre Dame's going to have to avoid. But this is a really good football team. This preview is going to look at Texas A&M. It's not going to be about the Notre Dame Texas A&M matchup per se, but I think it's important to kind of set the stage of this is the game to me that I look at and say this is the game that's going to tell us just how good this Notre Dame team is in all phases of the game. Skill talent, they're going to be tested on the perimeter. They're going to be tested in the trenches. I think they're going to be tested that way by both Miami and Texas A&M. So then you say, okay, well, how well do they respond to that? How well are they able to come out and say, hey, listen, we're going to answer this test in both games and show that we can be a team that can beat you in the trenches. We can play bully ball against you. We can beat you playing big boy football. We can beat you however you want to play the game. We can beat you that way. And at the end of the day, that's what Notre Dame's got to be in order to be a champion. I mean, when you go back to, to what some of those Lou Holtz teams, especially the '88 team in particular, the reason they were able to beat Miami, and I've said this a lot of times, is everybody talks about Miami's speed and the fact that Notre Dame could actually run with Miami. And not a lot of teams could, because you had Ricky Waters and you had Rocket Ismail and you had Todd Light and Pat Terrell. I mean, long-time NFL players, elite athletes at the college level, and a lot of people can do that. But what people don't really remember about that Miami team is they were pretty flipping good in the trenches as well. And Notre Dame was able to beat them there also, and that's really the big key for me when I look at this Texas A&M football team and this Miami football team for Notre Dame is, if you want to beat these two teams, you not only got to beat them on the perimeter, because I think this A&M team is going to be faster than they were last year, especially on offense, but you also got to be able to beat them in the trenches, because I still think these are going to be two really good football teams in the trenches. And when you look at Texas A&M, that's who Mike Elko is. As we kind of dive into specifically about Texas A&M, that's who Mike Elko is. That's who he wants to be. He wants to be a coach that that we want to have speed and we'll be able to do this and all that. But at the end of the day, we want to line up and smack you in the mouth. And that's that's the identity Mike Elko is trying to establish at Texas A&M.
Yeah, absolutely. It's year 2 under Mike Elko. I'm sure that the Notre Dame loss is still fresh in his mind. This game might weigh a little bit more for him because he's coming back to South Bend for the first time since 2017. But for Marcus Freeman, last thing I'll say, big picture, Marcus Freeman's 1-2 in home openers in his tenure at Notre Dame. He lost to Marshall at home in 2022 in the season home opener. Lost to Northern Illinois last year in the home opener. We've talked a lot and given him a lot of credit about you never make the same mistake twice. If they go down to Miami and get a win on the road to kick off their season, can you handle success? Can you pull the same strings that you pulled after you lost to Northern Illinois at home last season to spark that run, rip off 13 wins in a row? How will you handle success under a really, really good opponent? Now, the one thing is Marcus Freeman typically has the team ready to go in big games, whereas Marshall, Northern Illinois weren't those headline drawers. The Texas A&M game will be,
and that's going to be the key for Texas A&M. So let's dive into Texas A&M. Like I think as we look at this football team and you think about what they're going to be, and it just kind of this matchup. So let's just kind of get into this. Obviously, game's going to be on September 13th, as you mentioned, a night game for Notre Dame. Series history, quick series history. Notre Dame leads leads at 4 out of 2, won 2 out of the last 3, but won 4 out of 5. And the last 3 games have been regular season games, whereas I think the first 3 games were all Cotton Bowls. And then the last 3 games have been non-conference games. But you talk about, Trev, you talk about expectations for Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman showing that he can do this and do that. This is a big year where Mike Elko's entering into year 2 with a lot of the same conversation that we were having about Marcus Freeman going into year 2, which is, how do you go out and beat, Clemson 1 week and take Ohio State down to the wire 1 week and, just obliterate Boston College and just do some of the things that Notre Dame did in 2022 where they looked, you go and play BYU on a neutral field and you just completely thoroughly outplay them. You go on the road and you just annihilate Drake May in North Carolina. And then that same team loses to Marshall, loses to Stanford, and you're just like, I don't understand how that happens. How do you beat South Carolina in a bowl game, but then just get outplayed by Stanford? But you then have those great wins. And you look at Texas A&M. I don't know that they didn't have a Stanford Marshall type of loss, but you look at you lose to Notre Dame. No shame in that, right? That's kind of like the Notre Dame Ohio State loss in year 1. Then you kind of get hot a little bit, and then you go not only lose to South Carolina, but you get annihilated by South Carolina. And then you go on the road and you lose to an Auburn team that, simply put, just was not very good last year. We can be honest about that. That Auburn team didn't even go to a bowl game with that win. Their other wins last year were over Alabama A&M, New Mexico, Kentucky, who was terrible, and Louisiana Monroe. And then they beat Texas A&M. And you look at it and say, boy, that just how do you have that? How do you have that kind of loss? And it's a little bit of a head scratcher if you're a Texas A&M fan. And then you just go out there and thoroughly get beat by Texas, and then you lose to a 6-6 USC team in a bowl game. And it was it's like, how does that team that beat Florida convincingly, that blew out Missouri, that destroyed LSU, how does that team look like they did against South Carolina, Auburn, and Texas and South Carolina? There's no shame in losing by 10 to Texas and Notre Dame. That's 2 of the Final 4 teams in the country last year. There's no shame in that. Losing at home to both of them is a little bit of a oh man, come on now. But the loss to Auburn, bad loss. The loss to South Carolina, the way they lost was a bad loss, and then getting just not whooped. They didn't get whooped by USC, but getting beat by a USC team that you just shouldn't have lost to. You now go into year 2 saying, okay, you got a lot of guys coming back. Can you take that next step? And that's going to be the challenge for Mike Elko and his staff as they enter year 2 is there's a lot of coaches. There's a lot of coaching continuity. Both your coordinators are back. I believe their O-line coach is back. Can you take that jump in year 2 with a team that's going to have a lot of guys coming back, but some very important pieces are gone as well? And that's going to be the challenge for them this season.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Texas A&M was in contention to play for the SEC championship, weren't they?
If they were able to Texas in the last game of the regular season, they would have played for the conference championship because they at that point in time had only 2 conference losses, same as Georgia.
That's right.
And so if they'd have beat Texas, they would have played Georgia, I believe, in the conference because they would have had the head-to-head win over Texas. So they would have played Georgia in the SEC title game. I believe is how, if I remember correctly, that's how that one would have played out. Because of their 5 losses, only 2 of them were in their conference, which kind of,
that's actually crazy.
3 of them going into that game.
Yeah,
only 2 of them were in that. So they ended up losing 3 conference games overall. But going into the Texas game, that was the deal. They were 8-3, but one of their losses was to Notre Dame. So they would have been 6-2, tied with Texas, tied with Georgia. They'd have got in.
Gotcha. Good deal. Yeah, I mean, you start talking about expectations in 2025 for this Texas A&M team, and I look at it. You got to take a jump on year 2 under Mike Elko. Defense has to get shored up. He's a defensive-minded head coach, and we're talking about a team that allowed over 40 points to South Carolina, 35 points against USC in a bowl game. And so the overtime loss to Auburn, I think, was also a 40-point game for Auburn's offense. It was either 40 – I couldn't remember if it was 34.
Like 43-41, I believe. Okay. It was the final. And they let Auburn hit some plays on them. I'm going to look up the box score on that one because it did go to overtime. And they scored so it was 31-31 at the end of regulation.
Okay.
And they gave up and A&M needed to come back to get there. A&M scored 24 points in the second half. It was a 21-0 game. A&M scored late in the second quarter to make it 21-7. Then A&M came back and tied it up, and then Auburn took a lead again, and then A&M went up 31-28. Auburn kicks a field goal with 5 seconds left, sends it to overtime. Then they touchdown in number 1, and then it was field goal in overtime number 2, and then A&M hit a 2-point conversion in this third overtime, and Texas A&M did not. But yeah, they had to come back they were down 21-0 in that game. And had to come back, which it shows the grit to come back. But fixing it's about not being down 21-0 to a team like Auburn is going to be the key in year 2. But the fact that they came back the way they did, I think is further evidence that this program is growing. It's just not there yet, or wasn't there yet in 2025. And the end result may not have been what you wanted. But in my opinion, Trevor, and I'm curious what your thoughts on this, I felt like even with I think 8-5 was a disappointing season for the talent that team had. Having said that, I can still look back and say, I think there's a lot of growth from a program standpoint where you say, yeah, they're not there yet, but they're definitely not what they were under Jimbo anymore either. And I think that's a very important takeaway for this football team because that's a good foundation to build on. I think in some ways the culture was improved in very important ways, even though maybe the results weren't what I'm sure that they were looking for a lot of the time.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Some of my takeaways from Mike Elko year 1 at Texas A&M were some of my takeaways of Marcus Freeman in year 1 at Notre Dame after the 2022 season. Texas A&M played Notre Dame hard. Yes, it was a double-digit loss, but for most of the game, it was within it was very close.
Notre Dame scored 2 touchdowns or two scores in the last few minutes of the game. It was 13-13 in the middle of the third quarter.
Yeah. It was a much closer game, kind of similar to what the Notre Dame-Ohio State game was in 2022 when they opened. Yes, the final score was 21-10, but for a good chunk of the third quarter, it was 10-7. Notre Dame had the lead.
Yeah, Notre Dame led until within the last minute and a half of the third quarters when Ohio State took their first lead.
And so when I look at what Mike Elko did for Texas A&M, you had your wins like you highlighted. How do you beat an LSU team the way that you did? How do you compete in some of these other games? But then you lose to USC in a bowl game. How do you get blown out to South Carolina? I believe at home. That game was was that game at Kyle Field?
Let me look. I thought it was on the road. Yeah, it was at South Carolina.
Okay, at South Carolina. Okay, but regardless, to get blown out
it doesn't matter where they played. That's not – they shouldn't have blown – like to your point, they should not have been beat as badly as they did. Losing on the road to South Carolina wasn't the problem. It was the way they lost.
Mm-hmm.
That was the big problem for me.
But to answer your question, yeah, I feel the same way that you do. It was 8-5 is a disappointing season for Texas A&M, just like 9-4 was a disappointing season for Notre Dame when Marcus Freeman took over. But the foundation and the groundwork that they laid in that season propelled Notre Dame to do what they did last season. Texas A&M, I think, is set up to take a jump in year 2 under Mike Elko. They have a lot of coaching consistency, as you pointed out. I think some of the things are going to get shored up offensively because I don't think that they're going to be going back and forth with this quarterback thing that they had last season. So I think some of that organically is going to get worked out heading into this season. And so I think that's a good place to start when we start breaking down Texas A&M's offense.
Yeah, I think when you look at this A&M team, Trev, it absolutely does start with it starts with the quarterback position, and you've got to get it solidified. And when you look at the results last season of Texas, this is a team offensively that struggled with its identity. It's like they were trying to do things with Connor Wegman that they shouldn't have been doing. Then they tried to do some things with Marcel Reed that they probably shouldn't have done. It's about finding your identity as a football team. And they want to be a balanced football team. There's no question. They don't want to be just a run heavy. Like, they don't want the offense to look like when Colin Klein was the quarterback at Kansas State, where he, was your leading rusher. They don't need him to do that. You want to have a quarterback that can make plays with his legs. You want to have a quarterback that's a threat, but he's also got to be able to make throws and things like that. And I don't know that Marcel Reed is that guy, but now you get to find out because there's no quarterback battle. You're not torn between two styles of quarterback as you try. I mean, you're doing reps for Marcel Reed that maybe he doesn't fit, and reps for Connor Wegman that maybe he doesn't fit. Now you've got who your quarterback is, and you're building around that guy. And if they're able to do it that way, then you hope it can kind of take off. Because, I mean, you're talking about a team, Trevor, you've made this point about how Notre Dame didn't get their first touchdown pass until game 4, game 5, something like that. Well, Texas A&M didn't have their first 200-plus yard game passing until Missouri on October 5th. That was game 6 for them. So similar situation for them last season. I mean, they only passed for 100 yards against Notre Dame. And some of it was great defense by Notre Dame. Some of it was Connor Wegman just makes some bad throws. And then there were some games where you look at the Texas game, same kind of thing. When they lose to Texas, they only have 146 passing yards in that game. So having a quarterback that they can now identify, you're the guy, as long as he continues to improve, I think should help this offense kind of like I think consistency and continuity is important, Trevor, from a head coaching standpoint, from an assistant coaching standpoint. But the final piece of that is from a quarterback standpoint, just knowing who your guy is, as not even the players. I'm talking about the coaches knowing who the guy is. And not having to say, well, let's build around these guys. You're building around Marcel Reed. We'll find out if he's a guy capable of taking them to the promised land, but you're going to find out if he's that guy. And it was funny listening to Texas A&M fans after the LSU game saying, well, you're lucky you didn't have to play Texas A&M with Marcel Reed, and then they went and lost 4 of their last 5 games. There's extenuating circumstance. I'm not saying it's because of Marcel Reed, but I think by that point in time that the offense had just the lack of identity established did them in. And that's kind of the thing. And it's whereas LSU wasn't prepared for that. When the rest of the teams could prepare for that, they were able to shut it down because Texas A&M wasn't good enough at doing the things they needed to do. And there were some injuries, not having Le'Veon Moss certainly mattered, but there were some issues there offensively that your lack of identity throughout the season really came to plague you late in the year when you were playing Texas and some of those, South Carolina, some of those teams that had really good athletes on defense. Auburn game wasn't because of the offense. The offense started slow, but the offense also got them back in the game. You lost to South Carolina, you lost to Notre Dame, you lost to Texas because your offense wasn't good enough. And you should be able to have more of an identity going into year 2 with your quarterback. And now your offense is also learning year 2 of an offense. And so it's not last year where everybody's learning a new offense. Now they know it. And I think that should help them quite a bit on offense.
Yeah, last season was weird. When I go back and I break down the film, there were times throughout the season where Connor Wegman would be in, and they would be calling plays like Marcel Reed was in the game. Then they would put Marcel Reed in the game and call plays like Connor Wegman was still in the game. So it was an interesting, yes, you could call it, like it was an interesting relationship of what that offensive identity was last year. for Texas A&M, but this year they're going to be bolstered by an improved running game, an experienced offensive line, things that we're going to talk about here in just a second. But now having their solidified quarterback through the winter, the spring, this part of the offseason, I'm not as high as Marcel Reed as what some other people are. I'm not, staking my claim that he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, but I do think this offense is going to be much improved because all of the signs are pointing in that direction. You have your solidified guy. You're going into year 2 of Colin Klein's offense, and some of the staples that you need for a consistent offense, Texas A&M does have.
Yeah.
But as long as Marcel Reed is able to take that step and find the in-between your performances in games like – I think he won SEC Freshman of the Week twice last year.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find the in-between of that, then having some of the turnover issues and the accuracy issues that you had against South Carolina, if you can find the in-between,
right,
he'll be a decent quarterback for that offense.
Well, a lot of things that I'll say about Marcel Reed are similar to things I'll say about C.J. Cart Notre Dame. They don't need him to carry the team this year the way they did last year. And we'll get into some other position groups explain why, but the supporting cast around him will be better this year, in my opinion. A lot of it being because they're in year 2 of the system. Certain guys are going into year 2 as starters. The offensive line is played together. The backfield. So you don't need Marcel Reed to put the team on his shoulders and carry him the way that they did in November. And I think that's going to be key. Now it's like, look, run the offense, get the ball where it needs to go, and then we're going to need you to make 2 or 3 big throws a game, and we're going to need you to do some things with your legs. And that's going to be the key. You needed him. It's kind of like Notre Dame. Notre Dame needed Riley Leonard last year. They needed a guy that could put the team on his shoulders and say, I got you. A&M needed that guy last year. And Marcel Reed, Riley Leonard was a 2-year starter being thrust into that role, a very talented player. Marcel Reed was a first-year guy who was coming off the bench. You can't ask him to be that guy. Well, now they don't need him to be that guy, because I think what's around him will be a better supporting cast in a lot of different ways, which we'll get into here as we continue breaking down this Texas A&M team. But that's the thing is, and I think the experience last year should help him be solidified. Now behind that, let's see what they have around it. That's going to be, in my opinion, a very interesting dynamic is kind of finding out what also is there with them, and I think that's going to be a very interesting element to what this team is going to be. Is can Texas A&M take that next step offensively? Your quarterback has to be part of it. I just don't think he needs to be necessarily the main driver of that. He just needs to be the leader of the offense, get the ball where it needs to get to, and then make 2-3 plays with your arm, and then just be a minimum chain mover with your legs. And then anything you give beyond that, it's gravy and it makes you harder to stop. Like, that's the minimum for this offense to kind of take that next step.
Yeah, absolutely. The supporting cast around what Marcel Reed has makes, one, what he brings to the table all the more lethal and difficult to defend, but two, it's part of the reason why I feel confident in saying that Texas A&M might have the hardest offense for them to stop this season for different reasons. And for me, that starts with the backfield. You look at what this running back room has coming back. We've spent a lot of time this offseason talking about Le'Veon Moss. He probably would have been in 1,000-yard back if he didn't get banged up last season.
I think we talked about this. What was it last week? It was something like 1,250 yards, something like that is what he was on. If he just would have, like, I took away the game where he had 2 yards for 8 carries out of his numbers, and he had 10 touchdowns in basically 8 games. Because he had 2 carries for 8 yards, and I think it was the South Carolina game is when he got hurt. He had 2 carries for 8 yards. I took that out. You average those numbers over 8 games and put it towards 13. He's over 1,200 yards with, I think it was something like 15 touchdowns. He also caught 10 passes in 8 games as well. So, or actually be 9 games because he did catch a pass in the South Carolina game. But yeah, he has a much different year. And who knows, maybe that's enough for them to beat Auburn in that game. Maybe. And so maybe that's enough to beat USC. I don't know that. But I don't know if it made a huge difference because you still had Amari Daniels. But by the end of the year, running back, you don't have Le'Veon Moss and you don't have Reuben Owens. And that's the key is, like, if you think about Notre Dame, it's like Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and Aeneas Williams, let's say. Well, by the end of the year, if you don't have Love or Williams and it's just Price, yeah, Price is pretty good, but now it's all on him. And that's pretty much what they were going through last year once Le'Veon went down, because Ruben Owens got hurt at the beginning of the season. Or actually, I think it was fall camp is when Ruben Owens got hurt.
Yep. Yeah, it was.
E.J. Smith's a nice player, but E.J. Smith is not on the same level as Le'Veon Moss and Ruben Owens and Amari Daniels. He's just not.
No, I agree with you there. But this backfield, now that they have Ruben Owens back, Le'Veon Moss is back healthy, and he still had a productive year last year despite missing some time. I mean, he still had 10 rushing touchdowns. He averaged 6.3 yards per carry,
over
765 rushing yards. Yeah, man. I mean, he was a very effective back. I think he was the running back that tied up the game when Notre Dame was playing. And I think he was the one that had that goal line rush for a touchdown score. But regardless, they have a three-headed monster in that backfield that will be the core of what their offense will be made up of. Because there are questions around, what is Marcel Reed's ability and consistency as a downfield passer. We're going to talk about the receiving room in a little bit. But between the rushing ability of Marcel Reed, which is a proven factor from last season, and what this running back room is made up of, that's what makes this offense so dangerous. That is why, to Brian's point earlier, when we were talking about Marcel Reed, he doesn't have to put on the Superman cape every single week, because they have three running backs that are more than capable of taking over some football games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's yeah. I'm with you. Not like that. It's like you look at you. This is part of what I like about A&M this year. Take away the Notre Dame A&M matchup. That's not the point. We're just previewing A&M. This is why I'm higher on A&M. I think I have A&M 11th on my preseason top 25. And when I saw the rankings come out, I saw people having A&M in the 20s. I'm like, what? And they're putting LSU in the top 10, but not A&M, who had the same regular season record but smacked LSU. Like, I don't understand it, and I don't quite get why. Maybe because A&M didn't have as many transfer guys, because they didn't need as many transfer players this year. That's the whole point, because they have so many guys coming back. But I really like this team, and part of it is because in order to be a team that's a playoff contender, and I think A&M goes into this year, in my opinion, they should go into November as a playoff contender. If they get beaten in November by Texas and that knocks them out of the playoff, there's no shame in that in year two at all. That's a heck of a year. But I do think that they go into that game against Texas late in the year where they're battling for their playoff lives. Yeah. Maybe even a loss doesn't knock them out, but you better be competitive, because a competitive 10-2 maybe gets you in. Maybe even a competitive 9-3 gets you in, depending on how the season shakes out. But the point is, in order to get there, especially playing in the SEC and having a team like Notre Dame on the road in your non-conference, you have to have position groups that you can look at and say, we're as good as anybody in the country at these positions. And when you look at Texas A&M, there's two positions on offense where I think that's true, with this being one. And I think that's, as long as they're healthy, that's going to be the key. Where's Le'Veon Moss at the end of the year? Or, at the beginning of the year. Where is Ruben Owens from a health standpoint? But that position group is key. And the other's offensive line, which I know we'll get to. We were still talking about the running backs, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Running back room is definitely loaded. It absolutely needs to be in the conversation with one of the most loaded rooms in the country.
Yeah. I think there's two at the top that are better than everybody else. Mm-hmm. That's Notre Dame and Penn State in whatever order. But you get into that next group, and A&M to me is absolutely in the conversation in that next group about where do they rank in that next batch of really good running back rooms.
100%.
And if it wasn't for the injury history, I would say, dude, you could make it like if Le'Veon Moss plays all year last year and he rushes for, let's say he doesn't average the same numbers at the end of the year. They play a really, South Carolina's a really good run defense at times. They had a really good D-line. Texas had a pretty good run defense. Let's say he doesn't run the ball great against USC for whatever reason, and he finishes with 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. That's it. Not a great finish for him on the pace he was on. That's still a pretty good year. And you're coming back with Amari Daniels. Ruben Owens is coming back. Now they're like, hey, Notre Dame and Penn State are pretty good, but boy, Texas A&M is right there with them. That's where I think the conversation would be. And so as long as the health is there, I think this is going to have a unit that's going to have a chance to be one of those top 5 running back rooms in college football. And if you're top 5 as a position group, you're elite. There's no question. And I think this running back room has a chance to be one of those. It's certainly the best running back room on their name schedule, with all due respect to Miami, with all due respect to Pitt and some of the, NC State, some other teams have good running backs. my view, if everybody's healthy, this is the best running back room on Notre Dame's schedule and one of the best in college football next year, right after that Notre Dame and Penn State duo. Whoever you have 1 and 2, it doesn't matter. It's not the point of this conversation. Those are the two.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple more position groups to get to before we start talking about that offensive line. Up next is the wide receiver room. Now, this room almost got a complete makeover from what it was a season ago. I like the layout of what this room is now. I think you pointed this out. We talked about it before the show started. It fits more of what Colin Klein wants to do on offense. But you just go and look at what the makeup of the room is. You know, last year you had Noah Thomas, who was 6'6". You had Jade Walker, he was 6'3". You had some big-bodied guys in that lineup. And now this year, you have a bunch of little shifty guys. Not little, but you have smaller than 6'6" and 6'3" shifty guys in your lineup. They go out. They get Kevin Concepcion in their lineup from North Carolina. He's kind of that shifty type of wide receiver. You get Mario Craver. You got him in the portal, I believe, from Mississippi State.
Burner.
Yes.
Like small, but fast.
Yeah, absolutely flies. There's a reason he averaged 21.6 yards per catch last season. And it's not because he ended the season with 2 catches for 43 yards. Right. But, last season he had 17 catches, 368 yards, and 3 touchdowns at Mississippi State. Got an absolute burner in him. And then I like the move that Texas A&M did to really solidify Terry Bussey as an offensive player. He played both last season. But moving him over, he went from last year one of your smaller receivers that rotated into now he's your tallest in the he's your tallest in the starting lineup.
It's a pretty big change. I mean, it's kind of like what we've talked about with Don Schuler. It's the opposite of that, right? Yeah. Where we talk about Notre Dame safeties, where last year Don Schuler at 6 feet tall was the tallest safety Notre Dame had in the rotation. And now he's significantly shorter than anyone else in the rotation. And last year, Terry Bussey looked like this little tiny slot receiver compared to Jade. What was his name? Jade Walker. Jade Walker was like 6'4" and ripped up, and Noah Thomas is 6'6", and then there's this little Terry Bussey running around. And now you look at him and you're just like, okay, now he's like their biggest guy they have. But the point is Trevor is the way it looks now is this is what works for Colin Klein. Mm-hmm. Go look at his offenses at Kansas State and Lockett from a couple years ago. I mean, they're small, shifty, get the guys' balls in space. So it may look like, wow, this is a pretty dramatic change and a pretty big difference from what it was, and it is. It's a very different unit, and they're not only built different, but they play very different. They have very different games from what Noah Thomas and Jade Walker had. But what they have is a game that's better suited for what Colin Klein wants to do offensively. And I give him credit for trying to make it work with the guys they had last year. But you needed to go out and get guys that were more geared towards what you did. And it's not that, and what I mean by that is not, well, they want short guys. What it is they want speed and they want playmakers with the ball, whether it's a 5'11", got 5'10", Mario Craver who can stretch the field, or it's a 6'3" guy that's dynamic and fast and can stretch it. Doesn't matter. The size isn't the key. It's the style of play. And they need playmakers. They want guys they can run quick game to and they can make plays. They want guys that they can, run on crossers and they can run mesh concepts with, and that they can get on deep over routes and that they can throw verticals to off play action or just drop backs. That's what Colin Klein wants to do, but it's about being playmakers. He wants playmakers at receiver, and he didn't have that. He had guys that were like a lot of Miles Boykin types. They were going to do their damage up to and at the catch point. After that, their work was done. He wants guys that their best work is done after the catch, and that's what this group gives them a huge improvement in that regard. Is they're much better in regard to that than they were last year. So it's not that they're better players, worse players. It's really irrelevant. They're different players, and what they needed wasn't necessarily better. What they needed was different. For example, in Notre Dame's offense, the way they could have really used the Jade Walker and the Noah Thomas because they were a running team that was going to throw some up, some back shoulders and slot. I mean, having those guys on the outside, move the chains, things like that, that would have really been effective in what Notre Dame was trying to do. I think Georgia could have used some of that a little bit last year at times. Like it works for some people. That's not what fits what Colin Klein does, especially now as you transition into the Marcel Reed era, who is a guy that needs to be able to get the ball out quickly at times. You need to give him those outs to where now you can play off the RPO game, the read zone game, and the screen game, and it now fits what he does a lot better, on top of obviously being more of in line with what Colin Klein likes to do.
Yes, I could not agree with that more. This is very much a yards after catch type of offense. It's get the hands and the balls of the playmakers quickly, or get the ball into the hands of the playmakers quickly, and then let them go to work after the catch. Marcel Reed, you go and you watch him from last season. Now, he's going to evolve as a player. He in 2025 won't be the same guy as what he was in 2024. But based on the makeup of what the receiving room was last year, you had to run some deep comebacks. You had to run some,
slow developing
deep
big
curls.
cuts.
Exactly. Like, that's not Marcel Reed's game. This very much fits what Klein wants to do on offense. It fits who he has at starting at quarterback. But yes, this wide receiver room, I think, is this. The way I look at this is Texas A&M's receiving room has the opportunity to take this offense from being a good group and a good unit to, okay, this is a very difficult offense to stop. It's a very similar conversation to what we had about Notre Dame in 23 and 24, honestly.
It's kind of interesting, Trevor, because look, we're previewing Texas A&M as a team. We're not previewing their matchup against Notre Dame, but I do think it's relevant to. There's some similarities between what Texas A&M is this year compared to what Notre Dame is, and why are you excited about what Notre Dame is going to be this year? Well, they've got a really good offensive line coming back, and they've got a really dynamic running back room, and they got some transfers in at wide receiver that we really think are going to change the game a little bit, to where now the quarterback doesn't have to carry it the way that last year's quarterback was expected to carry it. And the expectation is they're going to take a big jump. And there's a lot. I mean, it's different ways. And Notre Dame brought in a 6'4", 220-pound guy, and Texas A&M brought in a 5'11", 190 guy from the same league that averaged 8.5 yards against last year. You know what I mean? So it's like they're very different players. But when I look at it, it's that right there. It's you build an offense around your quarterback that better fits what Colin Klein's good at. It was so obvious last year, and you could see it in the Notre Dame game, and it was all year, where Mike Elko was very frustrated with Colin Klein's play calling at times, very frustrated. And I think it looked disjointed a lot, because in my opinion, and I could be wrong, this is my opinion, as someone who, obviously we studied Colin Klein a lot the year before because he interviewed for the OC job at Notre Dame. So I've spent a lot of time studying his offense. What we saw last year at Texas A&M was not very similar to what Colin Klein ran at Kansas State. And my opinion is that the struggle is due to the fact that he was doing his best to try to call plays that fit the players that he has. And I give him credit for that, because that's what good coaches are supposed to do. But I just don't know that he had the experience with a variety of offenses that you need. Like Mike Denbrock has had to call a lot of different types of offenses because he's been an OC at 3 different schools and different scenarios and all that, where Colin Klein had been an OC at one school and they ran things a very similar way to the way he ran it when he was a quarterback at that school. And so I think there just wasn't that same experience. So what do you do if you're in a situation like that? Go out and get players that fit what you want to do. And what did he do this offseason? A receiver and tight end also, because I think Amari Niblack is, we can kind of just quickly talk about that position as well. He's more of a pass-catching tight end. He's 6'4", 240. He didn't do anything at Texas last year. He was banged up most of the year. He was hurt in kind of the offseason, and he wasn't healthy all year. But you go back and watch him for Alabama in 2023. He's catching over routes. He's catching backside seam routes against SEC teams. He's catching deep dig routes and making plays after the catch. Like, that's what he's looking for. That big receiver that they had last year at Noah Thomas and Ja'Day Walker is now being occupied by Amari Niblack. And so I think that's the thing for them is they're built more like what Colin Klein wants an offense to look like personnel-wise, which should make him much more comfortable as a play caller this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like this pickup that Texas A&M got in Amari Niblack from Texas. He was also playing behind Gunnar Helm, who was one of the better tight ends in college football last season. But to your point, he was banged up. What version of Amari Niblack does Texas A&M get? Do they get the 2023 Alabama version? Do they get the 2024 Texas version? I think it will be more on the side of where he was at Alabama, barring him staying healthy. But what he was able to do at Alabama was, to your point, very, very impressive. So he fits what Colin Klein wants to do on offense for sure.
Yep.
For sure. Next group that we're going to talk about, I believe, outside of the running back room, is kind of what the crown jewel of what this offense is going to be based around. Mike Elko, you said it in the opening that he wants to be a team that is built in the trenches. And this offensive line group is very experienced. They're very big. They have a lot of chemistry together. You guys can see it as
very big and it is putting it mildly.
Yeah, they're gigantic.
Line.
Yes, they are gigantic, and they have the numbers to boot. You know, this team last year, this offensive line has a combined 3,629 snaps coming back from just 2024. They also have a combined 59 starts. So this is a very experienced group. The running backs will be very familiar with the group that they're going to be running behind. I mean, this is a very, very good offensive line for Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm. It's experience. I mean, that's a big key. It's big. It fits what they want to do. There's some decent athletes, but they're not making their money on athleticism. I think Trey Zune is again, I don't know how Trey Zune looks as an NFL draft prospect. He's not the athlete that like a Joe Alt was, but he's a quality athlete, but he's very long, experienced, steady on the outside, got better and better as the year went on. Demetrius Crownover has kind of taken over that spot. Him and Ruben Fothery have kind of been in a battle the last couple of years. He's another big, long kid. They're not dominant on tackle spots. Armaj Reed Adams, same thing, 6'5", 340, but he doesn't dominate the way that you think a 340-pound guy did last year. He's just really good. He's not looking like Quentin Nelson or Orlando Pace. They just do their job, and they will need this unit to play like a unit that averages about 330 plus pounds this year, where they move people a little bit more. And that was where they were a little inconsistent last season, Trevor, in that regard. But again, it's for year one in the system. I think Chase Basantis is really the key for this offensive line, because you can make a case that just pure talent, he might have the most upside of anybody on the offensive line when he's right. Now, he was very inconsistent last year, but when he was on, you could see why he was a highly ranked player coming out of high school. And him stepping up and really becoming maybe the potential stud at the position could really help that. But this is a very experienced. All 5 of those guys started games last year. They didn't all start all 13 games, but they all started a bunch. Mark Naboo comes back, who was expected to be their starting center last year, but got hurt and wasn't able to play. But this is a good-looking group. And Armaj Reed Adams was a transfer from Kansas last year, so he's going into year 2 of the system. So this to me, this is the best part of their offense right here, is this group has to take a jump this season. And like they showed flashes of it. They're a lot like Notre Dame. They showed flashes of it last year, but it wasn't consistent. If they can be more consistent, and I think they were, late in the year, they were pretty good for the most part, but you could still, even in some of those games, you could see some issues at times against some of the better teams they played. But there's a lot of potential with this group. A lot of length and a lot of size.
Yes, definitely a lot of length, a lot of size. To your point, they built this offensive line for what they want to do offensively, but yeah, a lot of starts. I mean, I think Trey Zune and Demetrius Crownover and Armaj Reed Adams were the only ones that started all 13 games. Their center started 11, and then Chase Basantis started 9 last season. So it is a very, very experienced group, and one that if I was just looking just purely based off of size, if I was Reuben Owens or Amari Daniels or Le'Veon Moss, I wouldn't really have a bad time running behind that group of guys. That's for sure. That is for sure. Any final thoughts on Texas A&M's offense?
Yeah, I mean, what I want to kind of do with some of these, Trev, is when we kind of get down to it and we break it down, I want to dive into. I want to kind of have a little bit of fun and just make like a bold prediction about those units. And I didn't bring this up to you on the preview because I wanted to kind of be, something to think about. But, what's a bold prediction that you have? And a bold prediction isn't something that you're guaranteeing is going to happen, but something that you think could happen if the unit plays its potential. And And I'll give mine. I think Texas A&M this year on offense, when you look at what they were last season and what they look like when they were on their game, I think this is an offense that, in my opinion, can go up a touchdown in points. I think this can be one of the top 3 to 4 offenses in the SEC this year if 3 things happen. 1, Marcel Reed can become a better decision maker, a more consistent decision maker. 2, I'm right about the receiver fit in this offense, and Mario Craver is what they think he's going to be. I think he's the key because he's the true burner. And I think Terry Bussey is going to be their most dangerous receiver. I think Kevin Concepcion will be their most steady receiver. But if Mario Craver can be like a 25 catch, 500-yard guy and give them that stretch the field element, because the problem is with all the quick game and size, if they can't stretch the field, then people just start coming down and saying, hey, we got to defend your screen game, your quick game, and your run game. We're going to make you throw the ball down the field on us. And so I think Mario Craver's the guy that more than anybody else has that just pure vertical speed that can make you pay for coming down and playing man defense. That's for them all season. If that happens, then, of course, if their offensive line is steady, I think those 3 things happen. Looking at their schedule, I think this team's got a shot to go out there and be one of the top 3 to 4 scoring offenses in the SEC this season. That's my bold prediction for the SEC, for the Texas A&M offense.
Yeah, I like that. My bold prediction for them is I think Texas A&M is going to lead the SEC in total like rushing output this upcoming season. I think they're going to have 3 players who rush for over 700 yards, between a combination of some 3 of Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels, Reuben Owens, and Marcel Reed. And they got relatively close to what that was last season. I mean, Amari Daniels rushed for 661. Le'Veon Moss, with the injury, was over 700 yards. Yeah. And then Marcel Reed was over 547, and he played in 11 of their 13 games, started 8 of them. And so I think with more, now that is barring the offensive line also playing at more of a consistent level and playing up to the expectation, I guess you could say, that they would have going into this year. But
to your point, Trev, just to put a number on it, A&M finished 2nd in rushing offense last year in the SEC, just total yards, and they finished 4th in yards per carry. But at number 2, they still finished 30 yards behind Tennessee at number 1. So even though they ranked 2nd, there was a big gap between them and number 1. So that's a big jump, because I think you're going to have to be at 215 to 225 yards rushing per game to be at top of the SEC this year, at least, which is a sizable jump against a quality schedule. It's not an easy schedule by any stretch, but it's also not what Georgia has this season either.
Agreed.
So, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
I'm with you. That's my bold take for the offense. I like that. That's fun.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot. Well, all right, folks, that's going to do it for the offensive portion. We are getting ready to transition over to the defensive portion. But you guys know what to do. Before we get there, please be sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.